ago at the Iowa Cubs Stadium, and I got his autograph.
He bit you on the head.
It was awesome.
Well, speaking of awesome, it is awesome when we can visit with our good friend Rekha from the Des Moines Register. And just last week on this program, we touched on a subject and mentioned an individual that really had an interesting experience. And in conversation, Rekha, we said, you know something, you talked a little bit about Casey Gradishnig, and I said, bring him in.
And I delivered.
Let's talk to this guy.
Hey, good morning.
First of all, thank you so much for
Sure.
being here.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you being here. Now,
Let's back up a little bit.
background here.
Yes,
Remind us
background.
the
Okay.
story that you were working on.
Okay, well, I'm going to go even further back than that.
Okay.
So I have known Casey for about 20 years, Casey. I mean,
Oh,
since
wow,
high
really?
I didn't
school
know
now.
that.
Or more, I would say.
More,
even.
yeah, even more. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
here for 25. Pretty
Yeah.
soon after I moved to town, I met Casey through some mutual friends. And then some years into that relationship, Casey approached me with a very interesting prospect and said, I am about to go through a transition. Now, Casey at that point was female, born female, but always had identified as male, and he will tell you more about that. I mean, really to the point where he felt as if he was born into the wrong gender. So he said, you know, let's do some education about this, and I want you to talk to me and follow me through this process of transition and write about it, so we'll educate the public a bit, which was fascinating for me, really, really eye-opening, because I had not known much about these issues at all.
And
Casey
how
was
long
the
ago was
perfect
this?
conduit.
Because I feel like we're only really talking about this on a regular basis
Yeah.
now.
Sure.
Although
was
this has been
early
happening for a
90s.
Yeah,
while.
so nearly,
Okay.
20 years ago.
Nearly
Wow.
20 years
Okay.
ago,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
So then, fast forward to, and in the meantime, I think I should be your official biographer. I've written several
should be,
columns. I
yes.
wrote about your high school reunion at
Yes.
Roosevelt High School and
Yes.
what that was like coming
Yeah.
back as a guy.
Yeah.
And you know, you can share some of that later. But anyway, more recently, there's been this issue about North Carolina passing this bathroom law, which requires any person who is transgender to use the public restroom of their birth, of their sex at birth. And Casey approached me again and said, you know, look at the quandary that this puts someone like me in. That would require me to go into the women's restroom. And look at Casey. I mean, Casey looks fully male. And the idea of forcing him to go into a women's bathroom puts both he and anyone else who would come into contact with him in an uncomfortable situation.
Because many people are arguing that is going to allow perverts to come into
Right.
yeah,
the
that
bathroom.
men will deliberately go into women's bathrooms
Right.
just so that they can, right?
They
But
can
that's-
say, I was-
well,
yeah.
I felt it was so short-sighted, really. I think what people were really looking at, not to pick on Caitlyn Jenner, but I think they see people like that, people who have transitioned from male to female, who maybe are early in their transition and don't pass or still look masculine, and I think that really disturbs them and freaks them out. And so you'd start reading things about people saying, well, I'm worried about my daughters and my wife, and that man can't go into the women's room. And then it quickly escalates into this discussion about perverts and pedophiles. First of all, there's absolutely no data whatsoever that says transgender people are, you know, predisposed to be pedophiles or anything like that. So let's just take that off the table. These people are not doing that. And furthermore, there isn't any information that tells us that pedophiles are actually making that choice to dress up as a woman so that they can go into the women's restroom.
Using it as an opportunity.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it's really smoke and mirrors here. But I thought, okay, this is really short-sighted, because what they're not thinking about, they're worried about protecting their wives and their daughters, but what they're saying is that because my birth certificate in Iowa says I was born female, I have to go into the women's restroom if that's the law. I don't want to be in there, and I don't really think they want me in there. And what kind of situation does that create?
And you created that situation by testing this theory out, correct?
Exactly.
Yes, we
now,
did,
the
yeah.
law in Iowa, or at least interpretations by the Civil Rights Commission,
Yes.
is that Casey could use the bathroom of either gender at this
Okay.
point, right?
Yes. So Iowa's a bit more progressive and has that in their civil rights language.
Now, how long ago did you guys do this?
This was just within the past month.
Yeah, just 3 weeks ago.
So I know we briefly discussed it last time you were on our program, but
Yeah.
what happened? What happened if we had the same laws as North Carolina? How did people react?
Well, it's interesting because I had an idea of how people would react. First, I think you need to go back to before I transitioned. I'm 6 feet tall. I am a masculine-looking person. I have always dressed and presented in a pretty androgynous way. I never tried to pass or do anything. I just tried to be myself. But that meant I should and did use the women's restroom back when I was female identified.
Right.
That presented an issue for me all the time. It was very uncomfortable for me. I was talking with a friend and an ex-partner recently who said, yep, I remember it well, how you used to say, somebody come with me, as kind of a buffer. And we'd always go in together and we'd talk together as we were going in.
So people would be comfortable.
So people would know, oh yeah, we're intending to be there. But
Right.
what would happen is you'd see a lot of people, they'd come in and I'd be in there just coming out of the stall, and they'd come in and they'd look at the door and check me again. And either they'd leave or they'd say something to me like, this is the women's restroom, and I'd say, I know. And then they'd leave, or it would escalate and they would get angry, or they would call security, or they would call the police. So I've had police come in and take me out of women's restrooms.
They have?
When I was legally in there.
And
Before.
this is when
Before.
he was,
Before
before
the
the
change.
transition,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
he was kind of androgynous.
Yeah.
And people just thought, even though he was female, that he looked male, that he had a male look to him. So there was all of this confusion.
All right, now I have to ask you about the beard and the mustache
yeah.
because, you know, this is a dude that walked in here a little bit ago and I shook hands with you. I was under the impression it was the other way around.
Oh,
to be
you thought
totally
he was
honest.
going to transition
Right,
to...
I honestly did, and especially after I met him, and I went, really?
Wouldn't be very pretty, would I?
I know, but I said, how in the heck did you get
Yeah.
facial hair like this? Because that's not normal for a female to have facial
No,
hair
as
like
female born,
Some
I
of us
would
dabble
not
with a
have.
little
So,
facial.
so a little transgender 101. So there's actually a standards of care that the medical profession uses through both psychiatric treatment and medical treatment. And that usually means that you go and talk to a therapist and they give you the thumbs up, yep, you're congruent with who you say you are and your identity. You go to a physician who then prescribes you hormones. So I take testosterone, I shoot up testosterone.
Okay.
And that's a maintenance thing that I do. And then there's a series of elective surgeries that you can take, depending on how you are, how you present, how either masculine or feminine you want to present. So that's been my process. It was as if it was meant to be for me, obviously, you know, how tall I am, but the masculinization process was pretty easy for me. I started on a low dose of hormones, and it masculinized my voice. I used to be a singer. I can't sing very well
Yeah,
anymore.
how long did it
That's
take for your voice to start changing?
I kind of went through the Peter Brady thing.
Did you
about
really?
2
Time
years.
to change?
Yeah. So it's kind of sad, and I'm not a tenor like I was anymore. But that's a small price to pay. And also through that, about 2 years, really a puberty again, and a lot of things changing. Fat to muscle ratio. So you know, where women may have a little bit more of fat and chubby cheeks, you know, my face leaned out. I'm not as lean as I used to be, but
No one is.
And then facial hair and body hair in the appropriate places that are hereditary to my family. So, and up until about 2 years ago, I had a nice head of hair, but hereditary to my family means I don't anymore.
Nice, so you're a real guy then. How about that?
exactly.
High
But
five.
these
Losing your hair.
changes,
Yeah.
these changes were taking place 20 years ago when
Yes.
people weren't talking about this. Like the good and bad of what's going on in our country, people are at least talking about it now and
Exactly,
recognizing
yes.
it. They weren't doing that 20 years ago.
The gender community was, the LGBT community was, but the general public wasn't. And it's interesting that this is, you know, a lot of this is coming up in pop culture right now. Some of it because of, you know, Caitlyn Jenner, but all kinds of things happening in pop culture with the show like Transparent,
right.
Orange is the New Black with
the lead, in that show.
So yeah, it's kind of been the last frontier, I
So
think.
how, I feel like people might be more accepting now because it is being talked about. What was it like 20 years ago when you were going through this change?
Well, it was different. I think the hard thing for me, honestly, was to find resources. The internet really helped that. I would have probably transitioned much earlier in my life had I had resources, but it's so hard to find.
Where did you end up having to go?
Well, I had surgery in Montreal because they're a little bit more progressive in terms of what they provide. They have gender clinics there. Of course, they have socialized medicine, but they have transgender people can go to this retreat and have if you're Canadian, it's paid for, and they have, you know, so I went there early on. There are a lot of surgeons and a lot of medical professionals here. And I've had the same primary care doctor here in Des Moines who's prescribed me my hormones and has seen me for 30 years. And he was cool. So, you know, but that's not always the instance.
That's not always
If I could just interject, yeah, back then, this was a time when people were getting killed. Brandon, Tina, and there were several
Absolutely.
other very
Yes.
notorious murders
Right.
of transgender
And there
people.
still
because
are.
there- And there's still,
It's
and
a
there still
high
are.
proportionate of trans people who are being, receive harassment, who are subjected to violence. I was just reading some statistics just the other day that even in, you know, as we talk about medical needs, that 20% of transgender people say that they have been turned away for receiving medical care. 20%.
Medical care.
Medical care, and 30% say that they have received harassment while receiving medical care. So you think about a time when you are at your most vulnerable, and a profession who is supposed to be so respectful of who you are as a person, to be turned away. You know, there's a trans activist who died a few years back, but part of the progression of his illness in New York City was that he got a major infection about 15 years ago and was turned away from an emergency room because of his trans status. Yeah.
This is fascinating conversation. Can you guys stick around for a couple of minutes? Can you stay here for a little bit longer? Because I'm going to switch gears here on you, Craig, up in the booth. We're going to pay a couple of bills, and we're going to come back, and we're going to continue the conversation here because we still have a lot of questions to ask. We'll be right back. You're not going to see this on any other station, folks. You're watching CW Iowa Live.
It never will.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to CW Iowa Live. Lou and Jackie here are being joined by our good friend Rekha Basu from the Des Moines Register, and also Casey Gretishnig. He is the transgendered individual that we were talking about last week on the program that Rekha had a chance to go out and witness what happened when they were put in various situations. And Rekha, fascinating individual you brought here, young lady.
Oh, well, as you can see, he
Yeah.
has stories to tell, and he has a great deal of knowledge about this issue. You know, probably unique because I think he's been such a pioneer and such a trailblazer in both Iowa and nationally that he's a great resource also because we're talking more and more about transgender issues and laws these days, nationally, locally. And Casey really has been responsible for most of my education on this subject, although I probably have a long way yet to go.
Right, now if you're just joining us, Casey started transitioning from a female to male, and this has been how long ago?
Almost 20 years ago.
About 20 years ago. And I think when I first met you this morning, when Jackie and I first met you this morning, you convinced us you are a male. It was amazing, but you said you went and had surgery.
I did. This is a touchy subject because, you know, I wouldn't assume to start asking you about your junk on TV, but because I've put myself in the hot seat.
I'd be more than willing to talk about it. Yeah, okay.
What do you want to know?
Well,
But to be honest
yeah.
with you, part of the reason you're here because folks that are watching, that's what people want to know.
they do want to know. So I do want to say that I think it's important that as you start to be aware of trans issues and maybe you become aware of a transgender person in your life, that's a sensitive topic, and that just like you probably don't want an acquaintance or a coworker to come up to you and talk to you about, you know, your body
And
parts.
that's an interesting point because you've put yourself in a spotlight. People are
Yes.
obviously asking you
Yes.
questions, but we don't always think. It's like, okay, there's a privacy area here that we
There
need to
is.
think about, that we need to respect on this
So
side
maybe,
too.
yeah, you can actually help
Help
by starting
everybody,
to
yeah.
define what
Yeah.
does transgender mean exactly. Does it mean that you're at a particular point in a transition? Does it mean that transition is complete for you? How would you
Well,
define?
it used to mean when the term was coined years back. It used to mean more that people were identified, and it had to do with their gender identity, and that they were either in process or had landed somewhere. There's a little bit more of a broad spectrum now because there are some folks who are exploring their gender identity or maybe are a little bit more fluid. But for us old folks, transgender means that I'm a transgender individual. I have transitioned. I live in the identity that I believe I was born in, which is male. I've always identified with male from my earliest memory. Just like anybody else, if you think back on what your experiences were, whether you were 2 years old or 5 years old or 10 years old, You didn't know about some of those things back then, but you felt like that's who you were in your core. And that's how I felt, only it was incongruent with my outer shell. So I transitioned, and I'm transgender. To go back to the surgery issues and things like that. So be sensitive to people and ask them if it's okay to talk about that. But I'll talk about it since I'm a reluctant
And
activist.
we did ask.
You did. You
we
said
did.
I appreciate
We did
that.
ask.
So I have had, surgeries are different, and there's all kinds of things available, and they are becoming better and more available. Most people in my situation, female to male, at least opt for top surgery. So I've had surgery where I've masculinized my chest. I did that long ago. I did go to Canada. There are more and more surgeons around. There are surgeons in Des Moines who do that, and I know a young fellow who's going to have that surgery here, and it's a great plastic surgeon. But I can go to the beach, I can be in the locker room, things like that.
We have about 30 seconds to go here, unfortunately.
Okay.
You go ahead.
I was going to say, but I have not had any lower surgery. There are different options there. Some are more functional than others. To be honest, it's a price issue and it's a time issue.
Well, thank you for your bravery, for coming forward. We need to get you back on here because you're just
Seriously,
a pleasure to talk to. Thank you, Rekha, for everything that you're doing and bringing this into the highlight. Don't miss her article today in Des Moines Register, another big topic that many people are discussing. We'll be right back. You're watching CW Iowa Live.